Good morning, and welcome to Daily 15. Today's Daily 15 is titled Vida Yao on Eros and Anxiety. And unsurprisingly, today's excerpt comes from a recently published paper. It's called Eros and Anxiety, and it's by Professor Vida Yao. The paper explores ideals of rationality, rational mastery, authenticity, and how such ideals interact with transformative experiences, specifically the experience of falling in love, Eros. Professor Yao is an associate professor of philosophy at UCLA and is interested in ethics and moral psychology, specifically the philosophy of emotions and the philosophy of the nature of the self. If you're interested in reading along or reading the full paper, you can find it online for free. The citation is just at the bottom of the Daily 15 page, or you can just look up Vida Yao, Eros and Anxiety. You might also navigate on over to her page at the UCLA Philosophy Department website, where you can find other papers and hopefully maybe other subjects of future Daily 15s. With that being said, if you'd like to read the annotations for yourself, head on over to alifeofthought.com/D15 to read today's Daily 15 if you're listening to this on the day it came out, or you can navigate to it by using our bookshelf feature on the Daily 15. If you'd like to join the discussion, head on over to community.alifeofthought.com. Remember, these summaries aren't supposed to be the final word about what the author is saying, the final word about whether or not they're right, but rather the first word. So join the conversation and start filling in the rest of them. Without further ado, then we can go ahead and get started with paragraph 1. But, Paul argues, a problem for my hope to achieve this ideal of self-realization and rational self-mastery arises once we propose that the major life event that I am deliberating about is what she calls a transformative experience. According to Paul, such experiences involve both an epistemic and a personal transformation. One experiences something so novel that one gains a new kind of knowledge of what it is like to experience it, and a transformation of one's deep or core preferences. Crucially, Paul contends that one cannot have this kind of knowledge before one undergoes these changes to both what one knows and to one's preferences. While one might be skeptical that this level or kind of knowledge is a necessary condition of making a choice rationally, Paul proposes that the crux of the problem she is characterizing is that one cannot make this choice both rationally and authentically, given that authenticity necessitates that one's decision be based on already possessing the kind of knowledge that only the experience itself will yield. The problem becomes more pressing should we take into consideration the apparent ubiquity of transformative experiences within any human life, as contemporary philosophers applying Paul's work have been eager to do. So there's actually so much here, but it's important that we sort of place this paper in the context of the larger discussion that it's a part of. After all, there's this talk of self-realization, rational self-mastery, and most importantly, transformative experience. So let's go ahead and get started with our first highlighted phrase. Yao writes, quote, "One experiences something so novel that one gains a new kind of knowledge of what it is like to experience it, and undergoes a transformation of one's quote-unquote deep or quote-unquote core preferences." Now, so even though the subject of this paper is this idea or this problem of a transformative experience, in order to get a handle of what we are talking about when we talk about a transformative experience and what the problem we're eventually going to run into is, it will help to think about a few different kinds of decisions and kinds of conflict. It's best to start with the basics. So here is a simple decision. I'm deciding whether or not this afternoon to go to the movies or to read a book. Now, of course, there's a chance that going to the movies or reading the book will change me in ways that I can't imagine, right? Maybe it's just a really good book. Maybe it's Kant. right? But at the end of the day, these two candidate choices, what I'm trying to express here, is that these two candidate choices they're just ways of spending this one afternoon. Things that I'll do and things that after which I'll have done will exist for me merely as moments in my past, not as life-changing or life-altering experiences, but as the way I spent 2 hours on a Sunday. Now, crucially, in the case of this decision, there is a conflict about what to do. I need to decide. I need to pick one. I cannot do both things. But this conflict is external and it is surface level. And crucially, both things might be interesting to me in their own ways. The source of the conflict, then, is simply that I only have so many hours to spend in this afternoon, and in order to resolve the conflict, I need simply think about what I would like to do most or what's the most beneficial to me. It's sort of a simple conflict to resolve, and there's no special problem. Rather, it's the sort of conflict that we decide on rationally all the time, every day. Here is a harder decision. I am torn between pursuing a life of service and a life in which I only seek to gratify my most immediate desires. Okay, sort of a bigger deal. Now there's a sense in which this decision feels more fundamental, right? When I say it, it feels more important than, how am I going to spend 2 hours on a Sunday? If I'm actually torn over it, then I'm not simply unsure about what to do, but I'm almost having like a sort of existential crisis. But again, the decision is still my decision to make, and I might well feel the pull of both options. They might both be attractive to me in different ways. Service might be attractive because I feel I have a moral obligation to the world, and my self-interest might be attractive due to my care for my own pleasure. And before and after I make one decision or the other, I'll still be able to recognize the pull of the decision I didn't make. I'll be able to say, I chose to go with my self-interest, but I mean, there is a real value to doing the morally right thing. Maybe I regret my decision. What I'm trying to draw out here is that making one decision or the other is hard. It's a hard choice to make, and it's a more fundamental choice. But it's also a choice that doesn't, change me in this deep way, at least not necessarily. Of course, maybe being acquainted with service or only satisfying one's own desires is changes the way that we think about the world. But let's try to keep these things separate here. And that brings me to the third and final kind of conflict, the type of experience that we're discussing with respect to this paper, transformative experience. Now, a transformative experience is supposed to be special in that after one makes the decision, the way that she thinks about the world will be forever changed. Parents often speak of not knowing the extent to which they could love another being until after they had their first child. Or as we discussed in the Proust excerpt, to be in love is to see the value of another in a way that shapes one's perception of the world and shapes one's perception of what is important. So that's transformative. And in quite the same way, to fall out of love, to lose a loved one is just as much to have a rearrangement or reorientation of one's picture of the world and of what is important. You aren't the same person after as you were before. Making the decision changes you in this deep, serious way that we almost feel ourselves tempted to describe as like the death and rebirth of a self. Of course, there's no death and rebirth here. Anyhow, these transformative experiences present us with a question. How do we make a decision about what to do when making the decision will change, reshape, reorient our opinion about what to do? And that brings me to the underlined phrase. Sorry, I don't have an answer for you just yet. Really, the thing to do now is to elaborate the problem. So our underlined phrase. Crucially, Paul contends that one cannot have this kind of knowledge before one undergoes these changes to both what one knows and to one's preferences. Here's where we start to run into a problem. the normal values or potential guides for decision, the normal things that we appeal to, don't seem to be of much help here. So the philosopher that Yao is responding to, L.A. Paul, lists two sort of ideals that we normally take to guide our decision-making process. One is rational mastery over one's life, and the other is authenticity. But it's unclear what exactly are these things. Obviously, rational mastery sounds great, and authenticity sounds, it sounds good. But what are these things? Yao explains a bit later. When we talk about rationality in this context, when philosophers talk about rationality here, we're talking, they're saying that one should make a decision insofar as they're rational that produces the best results for them. So someone who's acting rationally, who's deciding rationally, is trying to get the best results. And it is supposed that to determine what the best results are, each person must decide what they, quote, must most deeply or fundamentally want. And so then there's this question of authenticity, being true to what you most deeply and fundamentally want, and then making the decision which furthers that goal. And as Yao points out, there's something compelling about this picture. I mean, of course, it makes sense to make decisions based on the things that we care about. We shouldn't be deciding based on anyone else's cares, right? And of course, though morality may come into the situation, that might be in the back of your head right now, it's at least it's at least worth asking what we are to do apart from it. And surely, though there may be some questions which morality may settle for us, whether or not to have a child, or whether to fall in love, if that was a purely moral question, if that was something morality construed entirely or answered entirely for us, that would be a little bit odd, that we're looking to impersonal theories for guidance. But this is that's a Lucas opinion. Maybe you disagree. That's absolutely fine. Putting that aside, though, with this we're faced with a problem, because falling in love or having a child or choosing one college over another, these transformative experiences, because they have such a resounding impact on our lives, because they change the things that we value and care about and want, they are such that we are not the same person, in the sense that what we care about or what we think is worth pursuing is different after we make them. So we're not the same self after we have the child or after we go through the college that we chose, that we were when we made the decision. And so the worry is that because these decisions change who we are in the most fundamental way, we cannot evaluate them rationally before they occur, because we simply won't be able to look through the eyes of the person who survives the decision, the person who is changed. And that brings us to our circled phrase. Quote, "the kind of knowledge that only the experience itself will yield." Now, I think, I want to be clear, much more happens in this paper than stage setting of the problem, right? Yao does a lot of sort of building and, looking to poetry. There's this book by Anne Carson, which she draws heavily from. I really recommend you read the paper yourself. It's very readable. Now, we've only breached the beginning. What Yao is eventually going to ask is, so this is the knowledge that we lack. We lack the kind of knowledge that only the experience itself will yield. Question, in what sense is this a problem? Is this something that we should be concerned about? Right? Yes, if we hold rational mastery and authenticity as the most important things, of course, we will be disappointed when we cannot be perfectly rational and perfectly authentic. In fact, it seems that at the most important periods of our lives, we cannot be perfectly rational and perfectly authentic, because, the transformative experiences also, they tend to be the most important ones. What's more important? Going to the movies or reading a book, or, deciding whether or not to have a child? I think the answer is obvious. I don't know about you. But Yao's point later on is that there are ways of living which do not take rational mastery and authenticity as the sort of sole goods of the human life, which recognize the madness involved in things like love. Yao quotes Socrates. He describes love as divine madness. As there are views which take these things as other equally important pieces to that puzzle, which eventually makes up the things that we consider well-lived human lives. And Yao doesn't, I don't think, want to say that we need to chase after these ways of living, that a way of living that prizes love and being subjected to things outside of our own control, things that aren't necessarily rational, lives where we sort of just focus all the way on emotion in the same way that we might have immediately been inclined to focus all the way on rationality. She isn't advocating for that, but her point is simply that we need not be confined to these ideals of rational mastery and authenticity. There are other, equally acceptable ways of living, and it is an option. That authenticity and rational mastery are optional ideals, ideals that we need not strive towards entirely. The quote-unquote problem, the one that we've spent these past 15 minutes trying to elaborate, isn't a problem for everybody. It's a problem for everybody who wants to hold on to a purely and perfectly rational ideal of decision-making. I wish we had more time. That's all we'll be able to cover for the first paragraph. But again, if you'd like to read more, you can check out Eros and Anxiety yourself. It's really a great read, and it's open access. It's free, so check it out. With that being said, then, I will now turn to the second paragraph. If you would like to annotate it yourself, to mark it up, to work through it on your own, you can head on over to alifeofthought.com/D15. Yao begins. But how distressed should I or any of us be if this ideal isn't a viable one, despite its initial and perhaps persistent allure? And again, this is the ideal of rational mastery and authenticity. And how much energy should philosophers spend attempting to show that the ideal is viable after all? One reason for skepticism about this ideal, attractive to us within liberal individualistic societies though it may be, is that it is peculiarly and almost singularly focused on one's self. A self who should be, quote-unquote, armed against the world in order to maximize the satisfaction of her preferences, independently of the potentially coercive influence of others. The ideal that emerges may strike one not exactly as selfish, which would depend on the content of one's preferences, but nonetheless solipsistic. And that's the end of our time together. If you'd like to join the conversation, head on over to community.alifeofthought.com to make your voice heard. Like I said at the beginning, my word is not supposed to be the final one, it's not supposed to be the last interpretation, and it's not supposed to be the last thought about what is right. It's supposed to be the first. So I look forward to hearing what you have to say. If you'd like to mark up the second paragraph, again, you can head on over to alifeofthought.com/D15. That's all we've got. It's been a great morning, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.